So, to start us off today, I'd like to welcome Ben. Ben's going to do a Conduct Yourself, How to Lead in a Diverse World. Ben is the CEO of Olympia Orthopaedic Associates in Olympia, Washington. Previously, Ben worked for Legacy Health and OHSU in director roles and finance IT. Ben has served as the president and regional executive for Oregon HFMA in Region 11 and has recently served on the National Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for HFMA and its 96,000 members. I want to say thank you so much, Ben. Take it away.
Can you hear me? All right, cool. Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. This is a little bit of a take on a presentation I did in Northern California, and that one was only 30 minutes, and this one is 90, so we'll see how I did. All right. I have a new laptop, and I'm trying to get used to it, so I apologize. All right. So I call this Conduct Yourself, and the reason I picked that word is there's two ways to say this word, right? There's conduct, and that's the manner in which you behave. It's, it's all contextual, it's your actions, it's how you do things. Then there's conduct, and that's how you carry things out, right? So that's how you guide someone or lead someone to get something done. So even though I say it's conduct yourself, it's also about your conduct, and we'll just kind of keep that in mind as we walk through this stuff, that's what we're going after. The second thing before we start is I want to just call out, the topic of diversity is one that is rife with hard feelings and people being very cautious, and I appreciate that. But I want to say it's okay in this environment. I hope you can all agree with me and agree to this, that this is going to be a safe place. So if you're coming from a place where you want to ask a question that you've been afraid to ask and you're genuinely trying to get knowledge and learn and grow, ask the question. We're not trying to cancel anybody here. I don't want to judge anybody for what you do know and what you don't know. This is intended to be a way to grow and learn together. The other thing is, I don't have the answers for everything. Like, I can check a few boxes on the diversity, charts, but I don't have everybody's lived experience, and so I can't represent everybody. But I will do my best to answer your questions to the best of my ability, and there may be times where I say, I don't know, but here's where I think you could look to find that out. Is that fair? All right. So I want to start with some just definitions, things that we're going to be talking about today. The first is inequality. So I love these graphics I'm about to show you because they really illustrated to me what these things really mean. And I had a doctor once who said, I don't understand the difference between equality and equity. And this kind of will help us walk through that in a way that makes total sense, at least to me in my visual brain. So inequality is unequal access to opportunities. So in this case, you've got a person in the red shorts and a person in the blue shorts. The tree is bending far to the left. So in this situation, more apples are going to fall to the person in the red, right? Just because that's the way the tree's leaning, more apples are going to fall in that direction. So most people say, oh, well, in an unequal situation, what we need is equality, right? What does equality mean? Give everybody the same tools, right? Everybody gets the same opportunity. All right, so we've got a tree that's bending, and we're going to give everybody the same ladder. And what that does is the person in the red is now closer and can pick the apples, but there's still a distance here, right, for the person in blue. They can't reach the apples still, right? So even though this is equal, it is not equitable. You understand the difference? Okay. So this is equity. And as I was running through this yesterday, I realized that the person in blue on this slide only has red shorts also. Because I was, practicing, and I'm like, and then the person in also red. Okay. So equity. Equity means that you custom fit the tools to fit the situation. So in this case, the person who used to be in blue now has a slightly larger ladder that allows them to reach the apple tree and to get at the apples. It doesn't mean they're getting an unfair advantage. It just means that we are addressing the inequity in a more fair and just manner. And then finally, we're back in our blue shorts, and this is justice. So at the end of the day, you can do all these things. You can give people ladders, you can give people help where they need it, and leg up on things where it's appropriate. But at the end of the day, true justice really is you straighten out the tree. So the tree is the foundation. The tree is the institution. The tree is, history. It's whatever those things are that are causing the inequity. And justice means you got to straighten the tree out so everybody has the same access no matter where they are. So these are the four things that I use a lot to kind of set the ground level for what it is we're talking about and what we're trying to get to. So you'll hear me say inclusion a lot today. That's kind of where my angle is on this stuff. So does that all make sense to get us started? Okay. So the question is, why does this even matter? I'm sure a lot of you work for big organizations and maybe some small organizations, and everybody's had DEI training. I've had quite a few. But why do we care? So what we're going to do today is we're going to play a couple of games or a couple of demonstrations, and we're going to see how that where we end up with that. So I am going to ask you to be a little interactive with me, and I hope you don't mind, and I know people are shy, but I will wait until somebody talks to me. All right, who knows who this is? That is Alex Gornishelli. She is my favorite TV chef. I started out not liking her, and I grew to love her. So her job being on TV is that she has to understand different ingredients, right? If you've ever watched Chopped, they give you a basket. It's got 4 things that are completely unrelated, and her job is to take these 4 things and create the most amazing meal that you can create. She does not have any input on what ingredients she has. She has very limited resources outside of that. And if she loses, she doesn't make any money, right? But if she wins, that's her salary. So she can't just say, going in, I'm going to do today in this competition, I'm going to make pasta, and I'm going to have some chicken and all that. That's totally off the table. She's walking into a situation, and she's got what she's been given. So similarly, what she does have at her disposal are spices, herbs, things like that. So you're still limited, though, in that you can't say, I'm making barbecue if all you have is curry, right? So let's talk about food, because I like food. You probably cannot tell. So chimichurri is a really lovely, rich sauce that you put on top of steak, and it really adds some great flavor. It's a little spicy. And have you had chimichurri on a steak before? Anyone? Is it good? It's pretty good. Does anybody know how to make it? Okay, throw out some ingredients. Cilantro, I heard. Garlic, olive oil. Parsley. A little red wine vinegar, give it that tartness. Red pepper flakes, gotta have some spice, right? All right, so there are 5 things, the recipe that I looked up. Olive oil, garlic, red wine vinegar, parsley, and red pepper flakes, okay? Those are the 5 ingredients. So I want to thank my lovely assistant, Meredith, who's come around and handed you all a piece of paper. On that piece of paper is an ingredient, one of these 5. I'm going to say go. Your job is to find all 5 ingredients on your team. And the first team that gets 5, I need you to raise your hand, and I'm going to tell everybody to stop. Don't move, just stop. Does that make sense? So you need to find someone, if you're peppers, you need to find someone with garlic, oil, vinegar, and parsley. I want to see a group of 5, one of each ingredient. Ready? Go. Okay, and we got a team? All right, everybody stop. Everybody stop. All right, everybody stop. All right, everybody stay put. Stay put. Tammy's hand went up first. Tammy, you have all 5? Okay. Can you bring your group up here to the front of the stage? Is there a group of you that had 4? Come stand on this side also. I picked you. It's fine. Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Anybody with 3? Why don't you guys, the 3, come up here? So we got 5, 4, 3, 2. Anybody only get 2? All right, you guys, come up here if you can. And is there anybody who was just alone? Who was just by themselves and never matched up? Anybody? All right. All right. Where's my Tammy? Tammy. Okay, so I did not have a group of 2, right? Oh, there's the 2. All right, you 2. What were your ingredients? Peppers and oil. So, let's say you're cooking a steak and all you have are peppers and oil. Is that going to taste pretty good? It is going to taste pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, well, a good steak, let's say. All right, so that's still going to be pretty good. You didn't get all 5 ingredients, but you're still going to make a really good steak. All right, what do we have here for the 3?
We got vinegar, garlic, and peppers.
Vinegar, garlic, and peppers. Okay, is that going to make a good steak? The vinegar is going to be a little weird, but it'll be all right. All right? But you're still going to walk away feeling pretty satisfied with the meal. It's going to be a good steak. All right? Team of 4, what do we have?
We're actually a team of 3. We had someone bail on us.
I see.
What we ought to do to be inclusive is call attention to that.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay to call people out for being jerks. Yeah, nothing wrong with that, yeah. Okay, well, what if you had included her, what would you have?
We would have her garlic. I'm sorry, we would have her peppers. And we would have any of their ingredients in there.
Okay, all right.
And then we have parsley, garlic, and olive oil.
Okay, parsley, garlic, olive oil, and peppers.
And then the player to be named later.
Player to be named later. Also, that's even better. I mean, that's a little more complex flavors, pretty tasty. It's going to be pretty good. So our team of 5, you had everything. Which means you can make a chimichurri. So that, I would argue, is going to taste the best. Right? Unless you don't like one of those ingredients, then I can't help you. All right? So go ahead and sit down. All right. So I think we talked about this. So which group was going to make the best chimichurri? Group 5, right? And why? I'm not going to let you say that. That's cheating. Because you need those different flavors, right? You need salt, you need savory, you need sweet, you need the tangy. You need those different flavors to balance off each other so that you end up with a good steak. Or I would argue it's going to taste better with all those ingredients than just a couple. If all you had was a steak with garlic, Believe me, I will eat that all day long. But a steak with chimichurri is going to taste better. So you want to go from, I'm going to have a good steak, to I'm going to have a great steak. When you think about your teams and pulling people together to create a team, do you want a good team? Or do you want a great team? I want a great team. I want to be a part of a great team. And I know that if I hire everybody who's just like me, we will have great ideas and we will never get anything done. Because I cannot get things done. That's just not what I do. All right. So why isn't this the same with your teams when you think about it? You know, forget all the catchphrases, forget all the terminology. But at the end of the day, just being diverse, what does that really mean? That just means, to me, making better. We can make better decisions when you have more voices at the table, different voices, different backgrounds. Do you think that you make better decisions if you have more or less perspectives? How about more or less experiences? More or less skill sets? All right, so what I'm trying to say is, I don't want this just to be a buzzword. I don't want this to be something that you have a list, I did my training and you check the box. That doesn't help anybody. That doesn't make this better for anyone. So what this whole thing is not is providing unfair advantages to certain groups of people. What this is about is inclusion. It's including everybody at the table who should be there. And the other thing to keep in mind when you think about the ingredients is it's more than race, it's more than ethnicity, it's more than gender identity, sexuality, it's seen and unseen disabilities. That was a wake-up call for me when I did some work in my company, and they're like, nobody thinks about the fact that they can't see where I struggle. And it's true. So don't lock yourself into creating teams and hiring people who are just like you. You know you're awesome. Everybody knows you're awesome. But if you surround yourself with people who are just like you, I guarantee you you're not going to be as effective than if you hire people who are a little different, who have different experiences, different perspectives, different backgrounds, definitely different skill sets. So now you have your team, okay? You've put in the work, you've thought about how you're going to build your recipe, make your chimichurri, you've got this great team, you're assembled, you're ready to go. Now you need to transition from forming to performing. So how are you going to do that? We're going to have more fun. So you're the conductor of a middle school band. Was anybody here in middle school band? I was in a couple. I think my senior year in high school I had 3 periods of band and 2 periods of something else, I don't even remember. Your band consists of clarinets, saxophones, trumpets, drums, some cymbals, and you're the conductor, right? So you're standing at the front of the class, you've got your score in front of you, and you're ready to go. And then you've got your students who are out there, each with their instruments, and in middle school, you're kind of getting the feel for how the instrument's supposed to work. If you've been to those concerts, it's not the best, but they try really hard, right? So you know, because you've listened to the music, you know the music, you can read the score, you know what this is supposed to sound like, all right? So I'm going to play it for you. And hopefully this works. Can you hear it? I tried to embed a video, but they were terrible. All right, so you guys know this song? It's the 1812 Overture. So what parts do you hear? Lots of cymbals, Trumpets. Cannons, that's my favorite part. We didn't hear the cannons, and I also did not bring a cannon, just, What else? Drums. There's some flutes in there. Trombones for sure. Lots of different instruments, yeah? Takes a lot to make that happen. All right, so I need, I think 5 people to volunteer to have a music lesson. All right, come on up. Yep, come on up. Come on up. Need 2 more. Yep. Come on. All right, come on, Carl. All right.
Tell me it's plastic.
It is. I heard clarinet. All right. I've got a saxophone. All right. Got drums. All right. And cymbals. All right. Okay, now don't do anything yet. I think this was my favorite part, was trying to order. I said don't touch it. All right. So now I'm at work. This is my team, right? And I say to the team, I want you all to go send an email to somebody and say X, Y, or Z. I'm giving you all the same instruction, right? And you're going to go off, and are you all going to do it the same way? Probably not. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a music lesson, and I want you to listen carefully and only do what I tell you to do. You are going to put your mouth on your instrument, and you are going to blow when I tell you to. Figure it out. All right, so we're going to try this all together. So let's put those lips on that. Okay, ready? On your instruments. Let's go. Okay, on 3, 2, 1, blow. Oh, stop. You're I did not plan for this that way. All right, so I gave you all the same direction, right? And everybody played their instrument beautifully, correct? Did you? The cymbals were good, the drum was good. You could hear it? No, of course not. Why not? I told everybody what to do. It is an instruction issue. It is. So the point is, I have to adapt my directions for what they have to play with, what their skills are, and what their instrument is. Just like with your staff, you have to adjust your approach to what works for them. So, for a flute, let's say if we had a real flute, you have to set it right here and you have to blow. The trumpet, you have to put your lips in there and get some vibration going. With a drum, you have to pound it with a mallet. So we're going to try this differently. So for the 3 of you, you're going to put your mouth on the mouthpiece and you're going to blow. And if you want to push the little buttons, that's cool. You're going to crash the cymbals together. And you're going to use those mallets and hit the drum. All right? So ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Better, right? Good job, guys. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, these were clean, by the way.
I was hoping. I was really hoping. I'm more clean here for your sake down the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on you, sir.
Yeah, that's perfect. So if you want.
All right. So explaining things differently to people does not mean, that it's special treatment. I guess what I'm getting at is, especially when you look at areas around neurodivergence now and some of these other things that you can't really see, how I explain something to someone it's important to make sure it's being received in the manner that you're intending, right? So even though I told them all the same thing and to do the same thing, if they're not able to receive that, or if they don't have the skill set to understand what I'm saying, you've got to find another way to talk to them. And that is part of managing in an inclusive environment. Oh, we already did that. I obviously did a good job with my slides. All right, so I am way ahead also, but I'll do my best to stretch this out. I'll tell you jokes. So now I want to talk about bias. And the reason I want to talk about it is I think a lot of people feel that it doesn't exist in themselves, and that, I can say, hey, my dad's from India, so I don't have any bias against people from India, and that's probably not true. I mean, we all have bias, and it's how we were raised, it's how we were, had our friends in schools, and how we read, and all those things. And what I want to try to do is talk about how to acknowledge it, but how to get beyond it. And because you can't fix something you don't know. So what is a bias? A bias is a prejudice in favor or against, and that's important. Some biases are positive. They're not all negative. Against one thing, a person, or a group compared with another. So, in general, when you hear the word bias, you're thinking this is something that's totally unfair. Like, I didn't deserve that, you don't know me, all right? It's to feel or show inclination or prejudice against someone or something, and really, it's a preconceived notion. So it's something that you have in your head that you haven't, you have no legitimate basis for saying about someone else, other than, in the past, this happened to me. So sometimes, though, bias can be a good thing. Can anybody think of a time when it would be good to have a bias about someone? Yep. Requires a specialty skill. You could train them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What if you're at the bank and someone walks in a black mask, gloves, dark clothing, with something in their hand? Do you have a bias towards that person? Is that probably a good idea? I'm just saying. So, it's not always bad, but it's always good to at least acknowledge that you know that you have them. All right. So, there is this organization, and it was started by University of Washington, Harvard, and University of Virginia. It's called Project Implicit. The mission is, and I'm just going to read this, I don't normally read slides, but to educate the public about bias and to provide a virtual laboratory for collecting data on the internet. Project Implicit scientists produce high-impact research that forms the basis of our scientific knowledge about bias and disparities. And this is the URL here. And you can also, if you just Google Project Implicit, it'll take you right to the site. It's a really cool and interesting tool, and I don't know how it works, but I think it does. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides around what they cover. So they have a gender test. So this is really how you associate typically male names and typically female names with words that generally indicate career and family. So what it's going to do is it's going to assess how do you identify gender roles. So do you always pick the woman with family and the male with career, or are you somewhere in the middle? You do not have time to think about your answers. You literally have 2 seconds to just answer. So it's really getting at your core gut instinct about how you associate these two things. Gender science, it's male and female versus liberal arts and science. Sexuality is, gay versus straight, and your opinions on those, or your biases, not opinions. I want to make the difference there. There's one that talks about Jewish people versus Christian people and the assumptions and biases you have around that. Old and young, Hispanic and European Americans, weight, fat, and thin. Race, black and white, in this case. Skin tone, light skin and dark skin. But wait, there's more. Arab, Muslim versus other people. So, it takes into the account the religion plus the nationality. Weapons. So, weapons versus harmless objects, that and how that aligns with race. So these are tough topics. So I want to make sure you understand, like, these are hard conversations to have about yourself, right? Transgender versus cisgender people. Physically disabled versus physically abled people. Native Americans versus white Americans. Religions in general. So it looks at Muslim, Jewish, and Christians and how we feel about those specific religions. Presidents, not only our current president, but past presidents and how you feel about them, positive or negative. Asian versus European Americans. And also Asian versus European. One is with foreign origin and one is not foreign origin, so they're similar. There's a lot of these. They take probably, 3 to 5 minutes to take. So I've done 2. And I want to share with you what my experience was with doing this, because I'm just going to be open about my journey with some of this. I took the race test, black versus white, and it said I was completely neutral. I took that, it was the first one I took, and I said, of course, I am completely neutral. I am great. I am the most woke, understanding, level-headed, positive person that exists in this planet. You can't catch me, I know what I'm doing. Then I took the disabilities test, and this was physically disabled versus able-bodied. And it said I had a strong bias. And I said, well, that can't be right. Remember I just told you I'm this perfect person and I don't have bias and everything is really cool. So I really had to sit down and consider for myself, okay, do I have a bias towards people who are physically disabled? That's a hard question to ask yourself. And I started thinking back, and I said, well, no, I don't think so. And then I said, well, but sometimes when you see somebody on the street and they're, kind of disheveled and they're maybe struggling to walk down the street, do I automatically assume that they might be homeless? Well, there's a homeless problem in town, so, that wouldn't be too far from the truth. Is that fair? No, of course not. And I started going through these scenarios in my own head about when I was little and when we had people in wheelchairs at school and how I felt about that and what I thought that meant about their mental capability. And these things start layering up, and I said, I probably do have a bias there. Now, reflecting, I can understand why. I can understand where it came from. I can understand it was my mom pointing at people on the street and saying, that person is homeless, stay away from them, they're scary. Or this person is that. It's a lot of learned behaviors. But you can't fix anything unless you are willing to accept the fact that you need to fix it. So I did a lot of self-reflecting on this. And I thought, okay, I have to acknowledge that this is true about me. And that means I can take action. If I know this about myself, I can check myself. So now, when I'm in situations and I see somebody who's physically disabled, I say, am I making this assumption because of my learned biases? Or am I making this assumption because I know that person and they're a jerk, right? So there are learned relationships, and I cannot like someone even if they're physically disabled, but I'm not going to dislike them because they're physically disabled. It's kind of It's a big shift in how we think about things. So that was my personal journey with this test. And then I stopped taking them because I'm like, I got to work on, maybe one at a time. I mean, I'm sure there's only maybe one or two others that, but in talking to people who've done this, what they find is even the people who are very enlightened about their own culture or their own gender or their own sexuality take these tests and find out they're completely unbiased. I was talking to someone the other day who's in the LGBTQ community, and he said, yeah, I took the gender test because I'm like, I'm totally going to nail this. And it said I was biased. And I said, just because you're part of the community doesn't mean you don't have bias or feelings about the community. My wife and I talk about that all the time. We both check some boxes, and we both talk about how sometimes we have maybe some bias against the people in our own categories. So the reason I wanted to take a little time on this is because it's a scary thing to do, but take a couple of those tests. See where you land. As people, we cannot get better until we acknowledge what we need to fix. I want to be a good person. I want to treat everybody well. So I need to know when I'm not doing that. So I encourage you to take some time. Like I said, it just takes a few minutes. Take a couple of those. You'll be surprised at how fast it goes. And as you're doing it, you're like, I'm killing it. This is great. I know exactly what to say to get the right score. It's not the way to do this, by the way. But you don't have time. I don't know how these people do it. That's why they get paid a lot more than I do. But it does open up a lot of things that you can take a look at and say, okay, I need to fix this for myself. So what are some inherent biases you think that we all have, or you have? Are you willing to share? Jennifer?
So as you were talking, I was thinking about, so I moved from the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest, very, very different. And so my daughter, when she came, she was 18. Oh, thank you. And John's always here to help us. So she was only 18, and so she'd be walking downtown Portland, and I basically taught her a bias that, as you're talking about it, I'm like, I taught her that I said, if you are walking down the street and there are houseless individuals coming up on the street, cross to the other side. And I did it thinking that was for her safety and security, but I essentially grew a bias for her and instructed her to create that bias. So now, as she's a little bit older adult, she still has that, thought of, as I encounter a houseless person, cross the street to the other side and avoid them and don't actually see them or give them any representation that they exist, right? Like, that's essentially what you're doing, is you're saying, I don't want to admit that you're there. So how do you deal with that when, I as a mom taught my child to do that?
Well, you can't fix it until you know it, right? So, in a similar fashion, when I grew up, every time we would drive downtown on Burnside, my mom would say, always lock your doors on Burnside. I don't know why. There was nobody on the streets back then walking up and down Burnside, but that was just a thing. And even to this day, when I walk down Burnside, I'm like, be sure and lock your doors. I'm like, okay, just whatever. But I think the main thing is to have the conversation, right? So, going to your daughter and saying, I know I've kind of taught this to you, and here's what I've learned. What I've learned is, first of all, yes, there are scary people who are houseless. There are also scary people who are not houseless. There are just scary people. I mean, I'm not going to get on that soapbox. People are just scary. So, so I would say, from my experience, personally, when I have started to engage and not look away from homeless people, they're friendly. They're just, out there trying to hustle, and I don't know why they're there, and I don't want to make assumptions about that. It's the other thing I don't like to do, is make assumptions about why people are without a home. But always you want to be aware of your surroundings. Always you want to be safe. But that doesn't mean you don't want to, or you can't acknowledge another human being who's suffering. They're not, 99% of them are not going to come after you and beg you for money and beat you up and all that. They're just trying to survive. I just think it's having that conversation, saying, I think that this is something I taught you. And, you know, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to let those things go. But I appreciate, thank you for saying that, for sharing. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Yeah, Michelle.
Can I just a quick add-on to Jennifer's comment in college? I was having a conversation with some buddies of mine, and there was some frustration over a similar concept. Whenever we'd be walking down the street, that we would always see women cross the street, walk by, cross the street back once they'd passed us. There was so much frustration. And I was raised by my mom and my sister, basically, so I had a very female-centric point of view with things, and I kind of just said to them, I was like, well, you know, also, it's a small woman, or a female, a smaller person, like, I kind of don't blame them for protecting themselves. And that was like a perspective that I had, but also I don't know how to fully unpack that, but it's just interesting, the different perspectives of it from the group of people that watch someone cross the street to go around them.
Well, my mother was that person too. We would cross the street, for sure. All right, Michelle?
So I'm a cop's kid. So, you know, my dad taught us very strongly to cross the street and also carried a gun everywhere he went. But I have two biological kids and then a number of other kids that go through our household, a lot of which don't speak English well. And there's an area in Tigard where I say, you may not go. It's wooded, it's around a creek, there are a lot of houseless people there, there's a lot of drugs there. And that's why I say it. It's not because I want them not around houseless people, it's because I want them safe. Any suggestions on how to explain the difference to them? I mean, I've gone off the safety component and stuff, but then like the 11-year-old who always asks why, you know? And I say, because there are houseless people and there's a lot of drug deals that are kind of, we know go on in that area.
Yeah.
And then he says, but then why do I not need to cross the street when I'm in this area of Tigard?
I think you kind of said it. What your concern and your safety concern is, it's the drugs, right? I mean, and anymore, I refuse to pick up trash in my parking lot anymore at work, unless I've got a picker and gloves and everything else, because we find people in our garbage space. What did they tell us? They were lighting hand sanitizer on fire to stay warm, and I'm like, I don't think that's what you were doing. So I think the focus is on the behavior that you don't like, and it's not about the person, right? It's not because they're houseless, it's because this is where a lot of drugs happen and you're not safe around that. Because if you touch something or pick something up, you could hurt yourself. Yeah.
I think, if
ahead.
I can, just as I'm walking up here, I think too that it does matter people's motivation with things. If your concern is protecting yourself and being sure that you keep yourself away from paraphernalia or things that could generally be dangerous to you, there's nothing wrong with that. I will walk down the streets downtown in Portland, and if I'm going through something that is akin to a houseless camp, and with my daughter, I will say to keep your eyes out. I look to see if there's needles on the ground. We'll be aware of it. But like you said, they're just people that are just trying to live and exist. But each person has to answer that question for themselves. What do you or don't you feel safe with? If you don't feel safe, it's appropriate and it is okay for you to do the things that you need to protect yourself and your
Never do
kids.
something to fight your bias that puts you in an unsafe situation. That is not what I'm saying. Not at all.
I think what we're talking about is two different, one is situational. Where's Michelle, who had the law enforcement? Situational awareness, right? That's a training issue, is where you're at with it. Bias is that you see a person that you just don't care for. But we all have the neocortex that's designed to keep us alive. It's how we've adapted, right? We have to have pattern recognition. Like, you can't stare at the leaves every time you see a tree and the tiger's gonna eat you, right? You build past that. So really, it's situational awareness, I think, is what we've deviated into. There's nothing wrong with that. It's what's allowed us to adapt and survive. You just have to if you understand that through a training as to which color you're in, then you can apply that probably a little better. It's a training issue.
Yep.
I would say for inherent biases, it depends on where you grow up too, like rural versus city. So like the gun control issues and stuff, those are, depending on where you come from, those are big biases, I think, because guns in a city are different than guns in the countries. Or like homeless people. In the city, you might be less afraid of homeless people, and then if you're from the country and you go see one, you're like, oh my gosh, this is scary, you know? So I think those are big ones where people don't see eye to eye.
Yep. So I was raised by pretty much my mom and her side of the family, which were white. My dad is from India, some contact with him. But I grew up thinking India was dirty and, you know, unsanitary, and the people were dirty and they smelled funny and like all these things. And then as I got older, I'm like, I like the food. They all seem pretty nice to me. So, you know, it has a lot to do with where you're coming from and how you were raised. I mean, as kids, we were just little sponges, right? We just think of everything that our parents say and think it's gold. And sometimes as an adult, the hard part is unwinding that. Anybody else? So some other biases we can have. Language. I think Michelle kind of spoke to that. You know, we have a lot of non-English speakers in the country. Work history can be a bias. I'll give an example of that in a little bit, of where I have some of that. Age, more and more, I think, is becoming a bias. And maybe that's because I'm getting older, and I think I'm getting tired of people telling me about old people. I'm just fine. I can remember almost anything, except for what I did yesterday. And then, you know, and disability is another one that I think we often forget in these conversations about inclusion, that sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. And I think we focus on the things we can see. All right. Okay. You're going to recruit for a receptionist. You've got 3 candidates. One is a 24-year-old male that worked at Starbucks for the last 2 years. One is a 53-year-old female that's been an admin assistant for 30 years and has had 3 jobs in the last 2 years. And one is a 30-year-old female that was a receptionist for a competitor for the last 5 years. So let's kind of go through them for this first one. What kind of biases might you have about candidate number 1? Age, work history.
I have a positive bias because I used to work at a coffee shop and I was like, I bet we have really good customers.
That's fair. No, but that's really fair. Bias can be good. What about his gender? Anybody worried about his gender? Yeah, you are. Come on. Thank you for being honest.
I was thinking in my mind, like, receptionist, that's a job for a girl.
Right. Exactly.
Probably change the name of receptionist to just reception.
Yeah.
It's like flight attendants used to be.
Yeah. Okay. Short work history. Fair. All right. What about our 53-year-old female who's had 3 jobs in the last 2 years? Job hopping. Would you just toss that one out? Why would you? Or why wouldn't you? 53-year-old, you know, I'm in that age range. Maybe exactly. You know, I'm at an age where parents get sick. And, you know, I've worked with people who've had to jump around to jobs that can accommodate them taking care of their parents, or their kids, or their spouse. So you've got somebody who's got good experience, has longevity in the field, and you're going to throw them out because the last few years, 2 years, when maybe there's a good reason.
jobs at the same time, or 3 jobs at the same time.
Sure doesn't. That's a really good observation. I wish I would have thought of that. Yes? Right.
Because I did have that where it's not, on my resume, you see all these jobs, but it was all my same job that just kept moving companies.
Yeah.
So,
That's a really good point. Especially in medical, where you have a lot of mergers and acquisitions and things like that, and then, with me, I work for an independent practice of orthopedic and neurosurgeons. We see people who are like, oh, I worked for this group for 5 years, then I worked 2 years for this health system, and then it's like, well, they were purchased, and that's when the job changed. And so my point with that is these biases sometimes require us to think critically about why are we just throwing this person out? And is that a good enough reason, or is it a good enough reason to maybe check and see what happened? Because everything else looks good. All right, what about our 30-year-old? She seems perfect. Why? I'm trying to trick you. No, I'm not. So let me ask you a question, and this is, I'm veering a little off topic because my leadership training stuff's coming in. So why wouldn't you want a really competent employee who wants to have this job forever? If they're really good at it, and they have no desire to do anything else. Is that a bad thing?
Well, that's why I would want to
Yeah.
because, there's a person who perhaps that's the job that they want, they're good at it, they know it, they like it, or, are they a person who's more flexible, and so they stay in places that are safe.
Right.
And they're not necessarily open to change, so that's why I don't automatically look back and go, that's great, I would say, I want to talk to her, she looks good, but I want to talk to her.
Yeah. Very fair. The other thing I will say that I'm noticing that I'm having to take into account as we're hiring is, I can't believe this is coming in my mouth. This is why I know I'm old. The younger generation. They do jump around a little more. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think you've got people who, after a couple of years, if they're not moving up, they're moving out. And so when you've got somebody, we had somebody that we hired about 9 months ago, and we hired him knowing that probably we've got 3 years out of him. And he's going to do great for us for 3 years, and then he's probably out the door. But take advantage of what he can, and that's kind of changing our perspective on when we see a lot of job hopping now. That's kind of what we're seeing. That's kind of what's happening. Yeah. I mean, you think, and a lot of the job layoffs and consolidations and all that stuff. There's always reasons for stuff. Okay. My point in this, I wasn't trying to trick anybody, Carl. My point in this is that you have a gut reaction when you look at something, and then if you think about it, you're like, why do I feel this way? When I first became a manager, one of the first people I hired was a financial analyst from a bank. Is there anybody here who works for a bank? Okay, good. So she lasted less than a month. It was a terrible experience. She fought me tooth and nail on every single thing we did. And she said, that's not how you do it. And I said, this is how you do it here. Like, if I go to a hospital administrator and talk about debits and credits, they're going to shoot me. I need to talk about profit. I need to talk about revenue. I need to talk about expenses. I don't care what the signs are on the general ledger. This needs to be something that they can understand. And after that experience, and we let her go, I said, I'm never hiring somebody from a bank again, ever. And I haven't, but I am also like, well, why? I feel that way about one person, right? So it's also your experiences at work that dictate, like, oh, I had this great coworker and she was just like this, and so if I could hire somebody just like that, that's what I need, you're discounting people who have other skills that they can bring to the table. So all I'm talking about with this bias stuff is just awareness and being open to the idea that you might be making judgments that aren't based on fact. All right. Home stretch. So what can you do? Now that you're enlightened and you know you have 100 biases and you're also a really good person and you want to be a good person, what are you going to do? First, I encourage you to spend some time and think, what are some of the preconceived notions you have about other people? And when do you say, I would never hire this, I would never work for this, I would never go here, or I would always hire somebody who's like this, or I would always want to work on a team that had this? You need to ask yourself, why do you say that? Is it just because you're experienced and that's what you need? Or is it just that those type of people bother me and I don't want to deal with it? Which is fair. I'll give you another example. I reviewed a resume this week and I read 2 pages and I have no idea what this person does. And I just wrote back to our recruiter, our internal recruiter, and I said, I don't think that she and I are going to communicate very well, so I'm going to pass. Because if I can't understand that, So do I have a bias about a legible, proper resume? I do. I don't care if it's pretty. I just need to be able to understand what you do, what you're bringing to the table. Be honest about your biases. Don't sweep them under the rug. We all have them. We all need to acknowledge them. There's nobody in here who does not have a bias about something. And so just acknowledge it and move yourself forward. Pick one thing that you want to change and practice. So for me, when I first got my diagnosis of not being good about people who were disabled, I started noticing people, and I would sit and I would take the time and say, okay, what do I feel towards this person? What assumptions am I making towards this person? How can I change that? Should I go talk to them? I'm not good at that. I am an introvert, by the way, not an extrovert. But find it, practice. Talk to a friend. Say, I'm really struggling with this. I don't know how to handle this, Michelle, like you saying, this is my situation. What's the right way to do it? And again, I don't have all the answers, but talk to people that you trust and see, maybe they say, oh, I've been through that, here's what I did. Don't be afraid to reach out, because you have to acknowledge your own weaknesses. This is a really simple chart that I used for a board of directors I was on for community college up in Olympia. And I joined the board 6 or 7 years ago. And I looked around the room, and there was a bunch of middle-aged white guys, a couple of older white ladies, and one Asian American on a board of 29 people, and me. And I looked around and I said, okay, here's a college who's got a commitment to diversity, a commitment to representation of all voices, and I only see a couple of voices here. So it took us many years, but what we started to do was say, what is the population look like in our community? And who do we have? What are we missing? So as we started interviewing new candidates, we started looking at, okay, we had 90% males. Our community was 55% female. That needed to change. And it's not like kicking people out, but how do you represent the voices of your students if your student body is not represented in your board? So this is just a subsection. This actually goes out quite a ways. And so you look at this, you say, okay, where am I underrepresented? What does our population look like? And you get the data, and then as you start having board openings, you look at what are we trying to fill. At the community college, we covered a lot of counties. It was like, We need somebody from the southern part of the county. We have nobody from rural Thurston County on this board. Let's go find somebody. It's a different voice. So I'm encouraging you to kind of start with your team and look at your kind of ingredients and what you're missing. What are those things that you wish you had or that you need? In healthcare specifically, I see Kim here, and I'm glad to see you because this is a great example. When I was still working at Legacy, they were putting together a task force to look at how to account for transgender patients in the Epic EMR. And Kim called me and said, we don't have anybody who knows anything about this on our committee. I said, I'll do it. And so I sat on the committee and I was able to speak to, that's offensive, or I wouldn't say it that way. But if you don't have the people who are being impacted by your decisions at the table, you are missing a key component of doing anything that's right, especially in healthcare. If you're putting together a committee to look at health and welfare for the Native American population and you have not one Native American on that committee, how are you deciding what's best for them and what they need if you're not asking? Now, it's not always possible to have everybody from everywhere. But as you work on things, think about what am I missing and how am I going to get it? Maybe you reach out to somebody in the community to get advice or to come and talk to the group. But don't lock yourself into, I've been doing this a long time and I know what I'm doing and this is how I'm going to do it. So what are some other things on a matrix like this that you should be thinking about? You were all really talkative a few minutes ago. Yeah. But beyond gender, age, and race, what are the other things you should be maybe thinking about when you're building a team, depending on what you're doing? What are other things? Disabilities, experience is absolutely true. Personality type?
Language and religion.
Language and religion could be important, yep. Yeah, these things that separate us aren't always bad things to acknowledge. Schooling, socioeconomic status, background. When we're working in healthcare, we're talking about how to make people better physically and mentally. I would say think about all the things that can impact that. If you're pulling a team together for a specific purpose, what are those things that's going to be impacted by the decision you make, and make sure you've got the representation to do that. All right. I'm going to wrap it up, but I want to be able to take some questions as well. So here are your steps. Assess yourself. Assess your team or your teams. Acknowledge the perspectives that you're missing. Look for ways to include diverse perspectives in your work. Always start simple. Don't try to bite it off all at once. We tried to start a diversity committee at our company, and we're only 300 people, and could not get it off the ground because what everybody wanted was everything fixed right away. And you just can't do that. You got to take steps. Look towards equity and justice, not just equality. And, take care of yourself. And when you do that, you'll take care of others. Any questions? Yeah.
How do you think about resource balancing in the area of equity? Because there's always going to be some people that need more, some groups that need more adjustment or things like that, and resource challenges come into play. So I'm thinking specifically, we've got a lot of conversations in schooling where my kids are, And we've had some challenges. My kids are African descent, and there's some inherent racial challenges between some of the Hispanic community and one of my kids historically, and the way that the school has dealt with it has not felt like it's a balanced solution. And so, I think, but that's probably inherent in any system when you're thinking about equity, resource constraints come into play as to how you adjust different equity challenges. So I was wondering if there's a helpful framework that you've seen.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I think that's one of the reasons why kind of societally we're challenged right now with this, is I think some people see it as you're throwing all the resources towards these underserved populations and forgetting about me. I understand that argument. I also understand that everybody has different, what's the word I'm looking for? Benefits to existing, okay? We're just gonna call it out. You have a certain benefit to life and a step above others because you're white, I'm assuming, male, I'm assuming, okay? So you don't have to worry about being talked down to because you're a female. You don't have to worry about the fact that you've been oppressed and your parents couldn't get it. I'm assuming, I'm making assumptions about you, right? So it's important to understand where the resources are trying to give people, again, it's that equity thing, enough of a leg up so that they're on an equal playing field. And when people say you're creating an unequal playing field, the answer is yes. This is not equal, but it is equitable. And when we've got kids who are super smart, but don't have the financial resources to play sports, to go to chess club, to do whatever, it does have an impact. So I don't disagree that there are more resources that need to be there. However, I also agree we should not be getting away from personal responsibility. And, I think, I'm thinking about a personal situation with a friend of mine, and, when it comes to bullying and, I think all the kids need to learn that's not okay. And so I don't want to excuse any, I don't think anybody's looking for an excuse. I think they're just looking for an opportunity to be on the same level as everybody else. But I think that's where the conversation has gotten skewed. And I think it has to do with how people on all sides try to frame things. I think at the end of the day, those resources should be providing an equitable lift to the kids who need it. Carl?
If the goal is to have an effective DEI committee, what's the minimum time commitment necessary? I think of my organization, we're investing 30 minutes a month, and as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, that can't be enough. From your experience, what's the minimum necessary time commitment?
Well, considering our committee failed, when it came down to I was the only person left, that was a problem. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. But I think you can, in an hour a month, come up with ideas that can make a difference. One of the things we did do is we have every payday we have a newsletter. And so for a while we were doing, I called them Jedi Mind Tips. And they were little 2 sentences, 3 sentences, something that kind of brought some underrepresented population to the surface for our company. So whether it was, we had one person who wrote an article about Cinco de Mayo and why that was not really a good thing, to bring in your chips and salsa and your sombreros to work that day. And it was very enlightening to have people participate and do that. But for an hour a month, you can get some people together and say, what are some small things we can do? Whether it's we're going to buy buttons for people, or we put up signs in our all of our lobbies that kind of list everybody. Everybody is welcome, and we don't tolerate negative behaviors or actions towards anybody. And we kind of put some of those, but you can do that with very little effort. to tackle the really heavy stuff is hard, really hard. We redid our dress code. That was one thing we did. So it was more inclusive to, Muslim women who maybe don't want to wear pants for scrubs. They can wear a scrub skirt. Had I ever thought of it? Did not. So it's things like that. I think you can do little things to make a bigger impact. But it really is starting and then letting those things build on top of each other until you get some real change. But if you don't start, it never happens. Tony?
When you're talking about kind of making sure you have when looking at a board or committee, that you've got all the different viewpoints represented, the part I struggle with are some of those off the slide items like socioeconomic status, even cultural. Like it feels like you're putting people into a box. Like unless somebody is self-identified as being poor or being whatever status they are, you're kind of deciding, oh, this person fits this category. So how do you go about determining that you have good representation without also kind of pigeonholing somebody into a position?
So I would say two things. First of all, I wouldn't include anything on that isn't necessarily directly important to what you're working on. So if I'm talking about a college, socioeconomic status probably has an impact when I'm working for the foundation on people who need access to money and resources. If you're talking about, hiring a CFO, probably socioeconomics of your hiring team is not important, right? The other thing is to let people self-identify. So with the foundation, I got a little questionnaire. It said, how do you categorize yourself? One of the things that I do that has been hard for me over the years is when people ask me what my race is, I'm like, I've done the DNA test. I am 50% Indian and 50% white, like Wonder Bread white. So what am I? You'll see more now there's biracial. I'm usually checking other because I'm not one or the other. So it really is about self-identifying. You don't have to. If I don't want to answer it, I didn't have to. And it's just, what I'm comfortable with. But I would say those categories really need to be categories that make sense in the context of what you're doing.
Ben, great presentation today. I think very, very thoughtful and very eye-opening too. But my question is, we're trained as leaders to hire people who are the best qualified candidates based on our information that's presented to us and our assumptions.
And you should.
I think that in your grid, like if I were to take that grid with the gender, age, what was the third one? Race. It'd be interesting exercise to do. No surprise, in healthcare, it's predominantly women. And if you look around the room, it's predominantly women.
Sure.
Would you, how would you make a decision between the most qualified candidate if it was fitting the norm versus maybe making a decision to bring more diversity to your team?
I am always a fan of picking the most qualified candidate for the job, period. What this is about is when you are looking for qualified candidates, there are sometimes qualities that you don't expect to see. I'll give you an example. So, do you guys know who Mike Tomlin is? He's the coach, the head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. When Bill Cowher left, they had already in mind who they were going to hire for head coach. But in the NFL, there's something called the Rooney Rule, where you must interview somebody in an underrepresented category for your head coaching position. They brought in Mike Tomlin. He was supposed to be the pity interview. They interviewed him, and he knocked their socks off. And now he's like one of the longest tenured coaches in the NFL. So it's really about providing the opportunity and looking at these things like, I've got an opening. This is a little outside the norm, but maybe there are other factors or there's something I'm missing. So it's more about creating the opportunity. I always say you hire the best person for the job, 100%. I don't think anybody's trying to say you shouldn't. Michelle?
So if you're trying to, I mean, I think about the board I'm president of. It is almost all white. It's pretty split gender-wise, but it's pretty white. And yet we have a goal of trying to reach the non-white kids in the Tigard area. And we cannot figure out how to break into that. And we've been told some of it is, especially from like the Hispanic perspective, is it's financial, but I don't want support. I don't want financial support scholarships, which we offer abundantly. Any ideas on if you're trying to look at, okay, if I'm trying to expand my board, but all my volunteers are white, and all my possibilities are white, how do you talked about looking at interviewing other people and looking at other options, but how do you break into that?
Yeah, I'm not saying this is easy by any stretch of the imagination. I think about what that just popped in my head is kind of the 5 whys. It's like, why is your board only white? Because there's only white people available. Well, why are there only white people available? Well, there's a financial barrier to getting involved. Why is there a financial barrier? Well, we need to cover X, Y, and Z. Why do you need it? And you get down to what the core is. If it really is that you need more support from other people and you don't call it charity, or you don't, there are ways to get around that. But I think it's kind of trying to drill into that and then asking them, what would it take for you to want to participate? Is this the only barrier, or are you saying that because it's really something else? You can't force anybody to do anything they don't want to do, right? Yeah. Got one over here.
Do you have any input on recruitment and retention, specifically of the neurodivergent population?
That's an area I struggle with a lot. And the reason is it's not something you can see, and a lot of people won't divulge it. And so you hire them, and then you're realizing, oh, this person is a little slower, or they're not understanding what I'm saying. And then you start talking to them, and they're like, well, I'm ADHD, I've got this, and you're like, okay. Well, then the next thing is, how can we accommodate you? There's certainly been times where it just hasn't worked out. But I think it's having that awareness, and we always ask when we hire, do you need an accommodation? And if so, what is it? And then we try to fulfill that. For some people, we had someone who suffered from like terrible migraines and some other sensitivities. We had to put her in an office by herself. That's how we got around it. Some people we just go work at home or whatever. So it's situational, but I would say where I struggle the most is with the neurodivergent people, because I don't understand it as well, and I don't know how I can help them. But the only way I know how to do it is to ask them when I know about it. It's just that when we did a survey with some of our staff, somebody said, I'm neurodivergent and nobody knows. And I don't want to tell them because I don't want them to treat me differently. We have to get past that. I'm not treating you differently, I just want to help you be successful. I want everybody to be successful. So that gets hard. That one's hard because it's just not something you can see.
Any other questions?
I want to thank you all. You asked great questions, very engaged, very open, and I appreciate the dialogue very much around all this stuff. It's not an easy topic, but thanks for being open and honest and willing to participate in the conversation.
Yes, thank you.